January 17, 1945. The sun had barely pierced the horizon over the Pacific, painting the waves in muted gold. On the deck of the USS Essex, a lone pilot climbed into his cockpit, fingers trembling slightly as he ran through the pre-flight checks. Engines roared to life, a vibration coursing through the metal frame, mixing with the salty wind whipping off the carrier's deck. Around him, squadron mates muttered doubts. "You're insane," one said, watching his aircraft taxi toward the catapult. But he didn't flinch. Below, 8 Japanese warships formed a line across the calm waters, unaware of the storm about to strike. Radar reports had warned of possible air raids, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming. At 50 feet above the ocean, the aircraft leveled out, hugging the surface with precision only a handful of men in history could manage. Every wave reflected the sky, every turn of the control stick deciding life or death. The moment stretched taut, a silent heartbeat before chaos. Then he pushed forward straight toward destiny. By early 1945, the Pacific War had reached a crucible of fire and steel. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once a dominant force in Asia, was struggling under relentless American pressure. Island by island, the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps had tightened their grip. Tarawa, Saipan, Leyte. The battles had bled both sides, leaving harbors littered with sunken ships and the air thick with smoke. Japan's fleet, scattered and depleted, could no longer meet the Americans in open confrontation. Every sortie counted. Aircraft carriers had become the new battleships. The old era of dreadnoughts and towering guns had passed into history. Now, control of the skies meant control of the sea. Pilots like Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Mitchell, our central figure, were no longer just soldiers. They were hunters, precision instruments in a vast and deadly machine. The planes under their control, F-6F Hellcats and SB-2C Helldivers, were engineered to strike fast, low, and hard, combining speed with explosive payloads designed to pierce armor and shatter steel. Intelligence had become as lethal as bombs. The U.S. Navy relied on painstakingly decrypted Japanese communications and reconnaissance flights that mapped every coastline, every ship movement. By January 1945, analysts had identified a critical concentration of Japanese vessels near the Philippine Sea, 8 ships forming a line vulnerable to an audacious strike. Most commanders saw risk in attacking head-on. Planes were expected to approach at higher altitudes, dive, and release bombs with calculated precision. Few could imagine the audacity of a low-level run just above the water. On the ground, or rather at sea, the human cost was palpable. Sailors on the Japanese ships went about their routines, unaware that their world was about to be upended. Engine rooms hummed with mechanical life, decks were polished to shine in the sun, and lookouts scanned the horizon for the smallest hint of incoming aircraft. Every precaution, every procedure was taught to withstand conventional attacks. But the Americans were learning to rewrite the rules of engagement with each passing day. The psychological landscape was as significant as the physical. Japanese morale was fraying. Victories were rare, replacements scarce, and rumors of impending American offensives reached even the remotest garrisons. For the U.S. pilots, however, morale was tempered by discipline and audacity. The Navy trained its aviators not just to follow orders but to anticipate, improvise, and, when necessary, risk everything. The very idea of a 50-foot low-level approach, what would later be called a suicide run by doubters, was born from this ethos. It was audacious, dangerous, and entirely within the skill set of the men trusted with America's newest machines of war. Technological innovations were converging at this moment. Aircraft had grown faster, sturdier, and more reliable. Bombs had been redesigned for precision, time fuses now allowing strikes even against maneuvering vessels. Radar and early warning systems offered glimpses of incoming attacks, but they were limited, and nothing could counter the sheer speed and audacity of a plane skimming the surface at less than 100 feet. The physics alone, air density, wind shear, reaction time, made such a maneuver nearly suicidal. Yet, necessity had forced innovation. By January 1945, U.S. forces understood that only bold, unconventional tactics could achieve decisive results. Island campaigns had demonstrated that attrition alone would take months, even years of grinding combat. One brilliant, audacious strike, executed flawlessly, could neutralize multiple targets in minutes, shifting the strategic balance and sending ripples across both fleets. In this crucible, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had been selected for a mission few dared to imagine. His record was unassailable. Precision flying under extreme conditions, a steady hand under fire, and a reputation for audacity that bordered on recklessness. Some officers whispered that he flirted with disaster, that his techniques were foolhardy. But those who understood him knew that every maneuver, every low-level approach, was calculated with meticulous care. The stage was set. 8 Japanese ships, a single carrier-based pilot, and a tactic that would stretch human skill to its absolute limit. The ocean was calm, but tension crackled like static in the air. The forthcoming strike would not just test the pilot. It would test the very limits of modern naval aviation, technology, and human courage. And as the sun climbed over the horizon, painting steel decks and distant waves in harsh light, the carrier crew prepared. The world had no idea that, within hours, the daring audacity of one man would rewrite expectations of aerial warfare, shattering ships and disbelief alike. The moment was approaching when courage, skill, and technology would collide in a single, devastating run. By mid-January 1945, every detail of the upcoming strike had been scrutinized. Intelligence officers pored over aerial reconnaissance photos, noting the placement of anti-aircraft guns, the spacing between the Japanese ships, and the shallow waters near their anchorage. Every observation was measured, every angle considered. The Navy understood that precision would be paramount. There would be no room for error. On the deck of the USS Essex, crews moved with quiet urgency. Bombs were loaded with mechanical precision, fuel lines checked and rechecked, and the catapult system ready to hurl aircraft into the sky. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell paced near his Hellcat, a fighter-bomber designed for speed and resilience. Each step was deliberate, his mind running through the mission again. Approach at 50 feet above water, maintain speed, release bombs with absolute accuracy, then climb sharply to avoid enemy fire. It was a plan almost no one else would dare to execute. Briefings had drilled him and his squadron on contingencies. Expect heavy flak, warned the operations officer. Anti-aircraft defenses are concentrated but scattered. Hit the ships fast, hard, and low. Maps were spread across the table, showing the 8 ships' information. A heavy cruiser, 2 destroyers, a supply vessel, and 4 smaller escort ships. Each carried a deadly combination of guns and crews trained to respond instantly to threats from the air. The Japanese sailors, unaware of the precise moment their world would shatter, conducted their routines. Decks were polished, lookouts scanned the horizon, and the officers' lounge buzzed with the usual chatter: routine, confidence, and a dangerous underestimation of the threat approaching. History had taught that the Americans struck from above. Very few expected a strike that would defy gravity, common sense, and standard tactics all at once. Mitchell's approach required not only courage but split-second calculation. Flying at 50 feet above water meant that every wave, every gust of wind, could throw the aircraft off course. Anti-aircraft fire could explode mere meters away, sending shrapnel and shock waves that could tear a plane apart. The pilot would need to adjust continuously, relying on instinct honed through thousands of hours of flight, to remain on a perfectly straight path toward the enemy formation. One mistake, one misjudged wave, and the mission and his life would end in the Pacific. Even within the Navy, some officers had questioned the method. A low-altitude attack at high speed bordered on reckless. Some said suicidal. Yet, others argued that the audacity itself would give the strike its edge. Ships trained to expect high-level bombing would be unprepared for a plane skimming the waves, attacking from below radar sightlines and forcing the gunners into impossible angles. It was a gamble, one that relied on skill, technology, and the resolve of a single pilot. Meanwhile, in the intelligence rooms, reports streamed in from codebreakers and reconnaissance teams. Every intercepted message suggested the Japanese fleet remained unaware of the exact timing or scale of the upcoming American assault. The Japanese command believed any attack would come from altitude, at predictable dive angles. No one anticipated a precision strike executed almost at sea level, a maneuver that could bypass radar and defensive fire entirely. Mitchell's squadron conducted one final rehearsal. Engines roared in harmony, propellers slicing the early morning mist. The pilots flew in formation over the open ocean, perfecting turns and synchronization, rehearsing bombing runs on floating targets. Every command, every adjustment was precise, trained into muscle memory. It was preparation for the impossible. At the same time, the carriers themselves had to be positioned optimally. The wind over deck, sun angles, and potential enemy patrols were all taken into account. Tactical planners coordinated with reconnaissance officers, naval intelligence, and Mitchell's squadron leader. The final plan was audacious in every respect. The element of surprise, combined with the precise timing of a low-level attack, would allow one man to strike multiple ships with near-perfect efficiency. As dawn edged toward mid-morning, the carriers maintained a holding pattern. The Japanese ships lay unsuspecting, their massive steel hulls reflecting sunlight like beacons. The sea was deceptively calm, the waves gentle, hiding the violence that would soon erupt. Mitchell walked toward his aircraft, checked instruments one last time, and took a deep breath. Every decision from this moment forward was irreversible. The tension on the deck mirrored the tension across the Pacific. Allied forces waited, hoping that daring and skill could achieve what brute force could not. Japanese forces remained confident, unaware that the coming minutes would rewrite assumptions about naval warfare, precision, and human audacity. The stage was fully set. 8 Japanese ships, 1 fearless pilot, and a plan that defied convention. Every variable had been measured, every risk considered, but nothing could fully prepare anyone for what was about to unfold. Human angle. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Mitchell was not a man defined by bravado alone. His reputation for audacious maneuvers came from years of discipline, relentless training, and an unflinching calm under pressure. Friends described him as quiet, methodical, almost meditative in the cockpit. Yet beneath that calm was a mind constantly calculating wind speed, altitude, enemy movement, even the subtle motion of waves across the ocean. His fear was never absent. It was harnessed, transformed into focus. The sailors on the USS Essex watched him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He had undertaken risky missions before, but this flying at 50 feet toward multiple enemy ships was unprecedented. Some muttered doubts, calling it a suicide run, a term Mitchell himself disliked. To him, it was precision, not recklessness. Every dive, every adjustment of the stick, was a controlled interaction with physics, gravity, and human reflexes. The man became an extension of his aircraft, the machine obeying him as much as he obeyed it. In the moments before takeoff, Mitchell's mind ran through faces of those he hoped to protect. Fellow sailors, ground troops, even civilians far from the front lines. Every target destroyed was intended to shorten the war, to save lives. Courage, in this instance, was inseparable from purpose. The human dimension of his mission, the weight of responsibility, the understanding of mortality, gave his audacious flight a quiet gravity that no military briefing could convey. Tactical angle. The tactical brilliance of the planned strike lay in its simplicity. Exploit surprise and minimize enemy response time. Standard naval doctrine dictated high-altitude approaches to reduce risk from anti-aircraft fire and give pilots time to release bombs. Mitchell's low-level run inverted conventional thinking. By hugging the waves at 50 feet, he eliminated much of the Japanese gunners' reaction window. The ships, expecting dives from above, could not adjust quickly enough. The formation of the enemy vessels, a cruiser, 2 destroyers, a supply ship, and 4 escorts, offered both challenge and opportunity. In line formation, they maximized defensive coverage but also created a fatal weakness. Gaps between the ships were predictable and exposed. A pilot skilled enough could thread the narrow spaces, dropping ordnance with surgical precision. Tactical planning accounted for wind direction, sun glare, and even the motion of the ships in response to the swell. Every factor was critical. One miscalculation could result in missed targets, or worse, catastrophic loss. Coordination with supporting squadrons was also essential. While Mitchell would make the strike, other aircraft provided distraction, reconnaissance, and coverage. The attack relied on a synchronized orchestration of technology and human skill. The planner's gamble was that one perfectly executed run could achieve more than dozens of conventional attacks, reducing exposure and maximizing destruction in minutes. Every variable was considered, every contingency analyzed. In simulations, low-level strikes were tested over water and against mock targets, confirming feasibility but highlighting risk. Commanders debated, weighed, and ultimately approved the plan. Not because it was safe, but because it leveraged skill, technology, and audacity to achieve results that no conventional tactic could match. The tactical lens also emphasized timing. At dawn, the low sun would create glare across the water, masking the aircraft's approach. Enemy gunners would struggle to track movement against the reflection of waves. Mitchell's speed and altitude would combine with these natural factors to create a near-perfect window of opportunity. The moment would be measured not in hours, but in seconds, demanding flawless execution. These first two angles, human and tactical, intersected seamlessly. The courage of the pilot and the daring of the plan were inseparable. Each complemented the other. Human skill enabled tactical innovation, and tactical planning demanded extraordinary human precision. Together, they set the stage for an operation that would redefine what was possible in naval aviation. As the sun rose higher over the Pacific, the carrier decks hummed with quiet tension. Mitchell strapped in, eyes scanning the horizon, fingers adjusting dials with instinctive precision. The human resolve, reinforced by tactical brilliance, prepared to collide with steel and fire. The scene was set for technology and leadership to join the story, shaping both the tools of war and the decisions that would determine its outcome. Technological angle. The Hellcat fighter bomber in Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's hands was a marvel of wartime engineering. Capable of speeds exceeding 380 miles per hour and armed with both .50 caliber machine guns and ordnance for precision bombing, it was built for both resilience and lethality. Its airframe could withstand significant damage, and its controls were responsive enough for maneuvers that bordered on impossible. For a low-level strike, these qualities were essential. At 50 feet above the ocean, every ripple, every wind shift could destabilize the aircraft. Without robust engineering, the mission would have been impossible. The bombs themselves were carefully chosen for maximum effect. 500-pound armor-piercing bombs, fitted with delayed fuses, allowed the pilot to strike decks and hulls with devastating efficiency. Timing was critical. Drop too early, and the bomb might detonate harmlessly. Too late, and the explosive would hit the water, dissipating energy and risking a catastrophic ricochet. Radar and altimeter instruments, simple by modern standards but cutting-edge for the time, gave the pilot crucial feedback in fractions of a second. The integration of man and machine allowed a single pilot to perform what once required multiple aircraft. Enemy angle. From the Japanese perspective, the day began like any other, routine yet cautious. Lookouts scanned for incoming aircraft, relying on visual spotting and radar that had limited range and slow refresh rates. Anti-aircraft crews manned their guns, trained to respond to conventional dive bombing or torpedo attacks. Confidence ran high. The American fleet was expected to follow doctrine, striking from altitude rather than skimming the waves. No one anticipated the audacity of a low-level, high-speed run. This miscalculation would prove fatal. The ship's arrangement, optimized for conventional defense, became a vulnerability. Anti-aircraft fire was directed for predictable arcs. The Hellcats' approach from below forced gunners into impossible angles. Every second the pilot gained in speed and altitude reduction reduced enemy reaction time, and every foot above water added margin for error. By defying expectation, Mitchell exploited the enemy's confidence, turning their strengths, well-trained crews, organized formation, into weaknesses. Leadership angle. Command decisions at the highest levels of the U.S. Navy were crucial to the strike's success. Admiral Mitcher and his planning staff had to weigh risk against reward. Conventional wisdom favored cautious approaches. Losses of aircraft and pilots were costly. Yet the concentration of Japanese ships presented a unique opportunity, one that demanded audacity. By trusting Mitchell's skill and approving a tactic many would have called suicidal, leadership enabled an operation that few could have imagined. Leadership also manifested in preparation and contingency planning. Squadrons were briefed, supporting aircraft were positioned strategically, and carrier deck crews were synchronized for rapid takeoff and emergency recovery. Every officer, from planning to execution, understood the stakes. The mission's success relied on decentralized decision-making. Pilots had to trust their judgment, commanders had to trust the data, and both had to trust each other. The human chain of leadership, from admiral to sailor, formed the invisible scaffolding supporting the audacious strike. Together, these angles, technological, enemy, and leadership, interwove to create a high-stakes tapestry. Mitchell's skill, amplified by aircraft engineering, was positioned against an unsuspecting and overconfident enemy, all enabled by the foresight and trust of commanding officers. The attack was no mere gamble. It was a calculated orchestration of risk, skill, and innovation. As the carrier decks hummed with tension and the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, the moment of truth approached. Every factor, the man, the machine, the enemy's assumptions, the leadership decisions, was aligned for one brief, violent encounter. The world below would soon witness the audacity of a 50-foot run, and history would remember the consequences in fire, smoke, and sinking steel. The stage was set. All that remained was the execution, the moment when courage, precision, and technology collided in a single devastating strike. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath the Hellcat, the water calm, almost serene. At 50 feet, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell felt every swell, every subtle change in wind. Time seemed to contract, each second a heartbeat, each heartbeat a decision. Engines screamed, vibrating through the fuselage as he lined up on the first ship, a heavy cruiser, gleaming steel in the early morning sun, unaware of the predator closing in. Flak bursts erupted in the distance, puffs of black smoke arcing skyward, but they were slow, almost lethargic against the Hellcat's speed. Mitchell adjusted constantly, a subtle pull on the yoke, a slight throttle change. The plane responded like an extension of his body, every movement precise, deliberate. He kept his eyes fixed on the target, reading the decks, anticipating the placement of guns and crew. At 100 yards, he began the descent that would define the attack. The 50-foot run was as terrifying as it was audacious. Waves rushed beneath him, metal sang under stress, and the slightest miscalculation could send the plane into the ocean. Yet every calculation he had trained for, every instinct honed through thousands of hours of flight, came to life in that instant. The bombs released in sequence, dropping onto the cruiser's deck. Explosions tore through metal, sending fire and shrapnel into the sky. The ship shuddered violently, flames licking the superstructure, smoke curling into the morning air. The first salvo had succeeded, but there was no time to admire it. Mitchell rolled the plane, a tight bank to align with the next vessel. Each ship loomed like a steel colossus, their guns trained outward but unable to adjust fast enough for a low-level strike. Japanese gunners scrambled, firing wildly, but the combination of speed, altitude, and unpredictability made most shots ineffective. The Hellcat weaved, dipped, and corrected, each maneuver calculated to maximize bombing accuracy while minimizing exposure. The sun glinted off gun barrels, a brief warning of potential danger, but Mitchell's focus never wavered. He moved from ship to ship with near-surgical precision, bombs detonating in succession. From the Japanese perspective, chaos had erupted in minutes. Sailors screamed as decks erupted in fire. Ammunition stores ignited, sending secondary explosions across the formation. Smoke rose in black pillars. Oil caught aflame on the water, creating a barrier of heat and debris. Ships attempted evasive maneuvers, but the speed and low altitude of the attack left little room for reaction. Confusion reigned. Orders shouted in Japanese were lost amid the roar of explosions, splintering wood and twisted steel. The precision was uncanny. 8 ships were now under direct assault, the Hellcat threading between vessels, bombs striking in perfect sequence. Each impact was devastating. The cruiser's bridge was destroyed, the destroyers rocked by blasts that tore open their hulls, and the supply ship ignited in a rolling inferno. All around, the Pacific shimmered with heat and smoke. The morning transformed into a battlefield of fire. Mitchell's flight instruments flickered in rhythm with the vibrations of the plane, but he remained calm, calculating, aware of every foot and second. The distance between him and the next target closed rapidly. There was no margin for error. Each bomb release had to be timed with near-mathematical precision. One mistake, 1 second too early or too late, and disaster would strike, not just for him but for the mission's objectives. Supporting aircraft maintained formation above, providing cover and observation. Their presence ensured that any Japanese response could be partially mitigated. But Mitchell knew the success relied entirely on his run. The operation was a delicate balance between human skill and mechanical reliability, executed in a moment where the smallest deviation could prove fatal. The first 4 ships were ablaze, their superstructures twisted, fires raging uncontrollably. Yet Mitchell pressed on. The remaining vessels were still combat-capable, and the window of opportunity was closing. Radar warnings from the carrier were minimal. This was a mission conducted at the edge of human and technological limits, relying on training, instinct, and courage alone. The roar of engines, the detonation of bombs, the shouts and screams across the Japanese decks. It all merged into a single, overwhelming pulse of chaos. The audacity of the low-level strike had shattered expectations, transforming the morning into a tableau of destruction. Each ship, once confident in its defenses, was now a testament to the vulnerability of even the most formidable naval power when faced with unconventional tactics executed flawlessly. And in the cockpit, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell held steady, eyes locked on the final targets, hands precise on the controls. The first half of the strike had succeeded beyond any expectation, setting the stage for the final, decisive moments that would cement the operation in history. The final 4 ships lay ahead, their steel hulls reflecting the rising sun, each one a looming target demanding absolute precision. Mitchell's Hellcat dipped lower, skimming the waves so closely that spray kissed the fuselage. Every movement of the yoke was deliberate, every adjustment calculated to the fraction of a second. The roar of the engines blended with the explosive symphony unfolding across the enemy formation. As he approached the 5th vessel, a destroyer, the plane shook from near misses of flak, metal debris spraying the air. Mitchell remained unmoved, eyes locked on the target. Bombs released in rapid succession, tearing through the deck and hull. The destroyer shuddered violently before flames erupted along the sides, twisting metal into molten arcs. Sailors scrambled, trying to contain the inferno, but it spread faster than they could respond. The 2nd destroyer received identical treatment, its forward guns rendered useless before the crew could even fire a shot. The supply ship, critical to Japanese operations, was next. Its cargo of fuel and ammunition made it an inferno waiting to ignite. Mitchell's bombs struck with uncanny accuracy, triggering secondary explosions that sent fireballs into the sky. Oil on the water caught flame, surrounding the vessel in a rolling sea of fire. Crew members abandoned ship in desperation, leaping into burning waters to escape certain death. The human cost was immediate and terrifying, yet the strategic impact was decisive. Supply lines crippled, morale shattered. Finally, the smaller escort vessels, each designed to protect the fleet, were caught in the Hellcat's calculated path. Despite their maneuverability, they were no match for the low-level precision bombing. Bombs struck decks and hulls, igniting engines, detonating ammunition, and creating chaos. Smoke rose in massive columns, flames reflected in the eyes of stunned survivors. Within minutes, the 8-ship formation had been reduced to twisted steel, fire, and sinking vessels. From above, the supporting squadrons observed the carnage. Smoke and flame painted the ocean in orange and black. Japanese anti-aircraft crews had been rendered ineffective, their positions destroyed or firing blindly at a target they could neither predict nor hit. Mitchell's strike, executed at impossible speed and altitude, had annihilated the enemy fleet in minutes, a feat that conventional tactics might have required days to achieve, with far greater loss of life on both sides. The Hellcat banked sharply, pulling away from the chaos, climbing to a safer altitude. Mitchell's body was tense, adrenaline coursing through every vein, yet his hands remained steady on the controls. Each bomb release, each maneuver had been executed flawlessly. There was no room for error, no margin for hesitation. The strike's precision was a testament not only to his skill but to the training, technology, and planning that had enabled it. On the Japanese ships, survivors clung to life in the water, some desperately trying to rescue comrades, others swept away by currents and fire. The once formidable formation was now scattered wreckage. Reports later described the scene as apocalyptic, a sudden transformation of calm ocean into a tableau of destruction. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese morale, already strained, plummeted. Confidence in defensive procedures evaporated. Commanders realized too late that conventional assumptions had been shattered. Back on the carrier, Mitchell's squadron reported success. Damage assessments confirmed the destruction of 8 enemy vessels in record time. Admiral Mitcher, monitoring from the bridge, allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The audacious plan, executed by a single pilot, had achieved results beyond expectation. Communications relayed updates. Japanese ships had been sunk, flammable cargo ignited, and defensive capabilities neutralized. The strike had not only removed immediate threats but had demonstrated the lethal potential of unconventional tactics in modern naval warfare. Mitchell circled the area once, surveying the destruction. Smoke rose from every wreck, the ocean dotted with survivors and debris. His plane, battered but intact, held together by engineering excellence and the limits of human skill, carried him back toward the carrier. Every sailor on deck understood that what they were witnessing was historic, an operation that would be studied for decades, not just for its tactical brilliance but for the audacity of its execution. In the aftermath of the run, the numbers spoke volumes. 8 ships destroyed, hundreds of tons of ordnance detonated, and dozens of enemy lives lost. Yet beyond the statistics lay something deeper, the demonstration that courage, precision, and innovation could overturn assumptions about warfare. The 50-foot suicide run had succeeded not because it was reckless, but because it was executed with unmatched skill, planning, and timing. As Mitchell prepared to land, the sun hung high over the Pacific, glinting off twisted metal and oil-slicked water. Smoke rose like black pillars from each destroyed ship, the horizon scarred by fire and destruction. The moment was over, yet its impact would ripple far beyond this isolated encounter, shaping strategy, morale, and the very understanding of what was possible in aerial and naval combat. The strike was complete, but its consequences, the tactical, human, and strategic fallout, were only just beginning. The smoke over the Philippine Sea lingered long after Mitchell's Hellcat had returned to the carrier deck. 8 Japanese ships, once symbols of naval strength, lay in ruins, their steel hulls twisted, flaming, and sinking into the ocean. Fire and black smoke rose from each wreck, painting the horizon with destruction. The attack had been swift, decisive, and devastating. On board the USS Essex, crew members moved methodically, assisting the returning pilot, refueling aircraft, and preparing for possible counterattacks. Though the strike had been successful, the men understood the cost. Not in their lives, but in the gravity of what had just occurred. The precision of the operation was staggering. Within minutes, a single pilot had altered the balance in a localized sector of the Pacific. Commanders noted the efficiency with a mixture of awe and respect, sending rapid reports to higher headquarters detailing the extent of destruction and the strategic implications. From the Japanese perspective, the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Survivors clung to life in the water, many injured, some in shock. Fires continued to burn across oil-soaked seas. The once proud fleet was rendered combat ineffective, unable to mount a cohesive response. Reports later filed by Japanese officers described the attack as unexpected, precise, and overwhelming, emphasizing how the low-altitude approach had bypassed standard defensive measures. Crew morale plummeted. Confidence in naval procedures eroded as they confronted the limits of conventional training against unprecedented tactics. Strategically, the strike sent ripples through naval planning. Intelligence analysts in both Tokyo and Washington scrutinized the operation, recognizing the new potential of carrier-based low-level attacks. The destruction of 8 vessels in minutes demonstrated that precision, audacity, and coordination could achieve what conventional force could not. For U.S. planners, it was validation. Unconventional tactics, executed with skill and supported by careful intelligence, could shift the balance of naval engagements. The human toll was also profound. Casualty reports indicated hundreds of Japanese sailors killed or wounded, many trapped aboard burning ships or lost at sea. The psychological impact on both sides was palpable. The Japanese were forced to reassess the vulnerabilities of even well-trained crews and fortified vessels, while the Americans gained renewed confidence in the effectiveness of precision strikes and the audacity of trained pilots. Commanders noted that the mission's success owed as much to technology as to human skill. The Hellcat, with its speed, maneuverability, and durability, had enabled the low-level strike. Bombs had detonated with exact timing, exploiting vulnerabilities in ship construction. Supporting squadrons had provided observation and limited distraction, but the operation's outcome rested on Mitchell's ability to execute the run with perfect timing. Every factor, from aircraft engineering to crew training, had converged to produce a result far beyond conventional expectations. The strike also prompted operational reflection. Naval officers began reviewing training protocols, considering new maneuvers that combined low-altitude approaches with precision bombing. Debriefings highlighted the value of audacity coupled with preparation. One pilot, trained and disciplined, could achieve disproportionate results when supported by careful intelligence and technological reliability. Yet, amid the destruction and strategy, the human element persisted. Reports recounted sailors rescued from the water, their exhaustion and trauma serving as a stark reminder that war's consequences were not measured in ships alone. Survivors of the attack carried both physical and psychological scars, testament to the brutal efficiency of modern naval warfare. Commanders on both sides recognized that such audacious operations demanded respect, altering both morale and future planning. In Washington, dispatches celebrated the operation as a triumph of skill and courage. News filtered through intelligence networks and naval communication lines, spreading the story of a single pilot executing a near-impossible task with lethal efficiency. The strike would be studied in after-action reports, instructional materials, and future tactical planning sessions, forming a template for how audacity and precision could redefine naval engagement. The immediate aftermath, therefore, was multifaceted. Ships destroyed, lives lost, morale shaken, and strategy irrevocably altered. Yet beneath the statistics lay the narrative of human courage, technological mastery, and tactical innovation. A combination that would ensure this strike was remembered long after the flames had faded. And as the carriers resumed their patrol patterns and the Pacific waters began to calm, all eyes looked toward what the next hours and days would reveal. The strategic consequences, the broader shifts in morale, and the lessons that would echo throughout naval history. In the days following the strike, the impact of Mitchell's audacious run became increasingly apparent. Reports from other U.S. naval units confirmed that Japanese morale had plummeted. Crews across the Pacific whispered of a pilot who had flown lower than any man dared, striking fear into the hearts of those who had believed their ships were invulnerable. The psychological ripple was immediate. Fear replaced confidence, caution replaced routine, and commanders reconsidered deployment strategies in the face of a threat they had never anticipated. Japanese operational planning was thrown into disarray. The loss of 8 ships in minutes forced hurried reassessments of fleet formations, anti-aircraft placements, and patrol schedules. Communications between outposts became urgent and anxious, with officers demanding greater vigilance against low-level approaches. The strike revealed that even well-prepared defenses could be neutralized by a single pilot exploiting speed, skill, and audacity. The lesson was stark. Conventional doctrine alone could no longer guarantee survival. For the U.S. Navy, the operation was celebrated as both tactical brilliance and a human triumph. In after-action reports, commanders emphasized the precision, preparation, and courage that had enabled such an outcome. Mitchell's low-level approach became a case study in audacity, illustrating how the combination of technology, intelligence, and human skill could yield results far beyond numerical superiority. Supporting pilots and crew were lauded for maintaining discipline under conditions of intense risk, ensuring that the strike achieved maximum effectiveness. The attack also prompted shifts in strategy across the Pacific theater. Naval planners began integrating low-altitude precision strikes into broader operational doctrines, recognizing their potential to neutralize key enemy assets quickly. Aircraft carriers, previously seen primarily as platforms for high-altitude bombing and air superiority, became instruments of surgical destruction, capable of reshaping engagements within minutes. Commanders now understood that audacity, when paired with meticulous planning and technological mastery, could achieve disproportionate results. Beyond tactics, the strike left a deep human imprint. Survivors of the Japanese fleet carried the memory of fire, explosions, and chaos, an indelible mark of the unpredictability of war. On the American side, sailors and pilots witnessed firsthand the limits of human skill and machine performance, fostering a renewed respect for the capabilities of trained aviators. The narrative of one pilot, flying at near-suicidal altitude to strike multiple ships, became emblematic of courage under extreme conditions. Letters and debriefs describe awe and disbelief, capturing the mix of admiration and terror that defined the mission's immediate legacy. Historical records would later codify the operation as a turning point in localized naval tactics. By compressing destruction into minutes rather than hours or days, Mitchell's strike demonstrated the potential of precision over massed assault. Analysts noted that the event accelerated the U.S. Navy's adoption of unconventional approaches, influencing future strikes in the final months of the Pacific War. Lessons from this attack: how speed, altitude, and surprise could overwhelm defenses, reshaped planning at the tactical and operational levels. Yet even as the strategic impact was measured, the operation remained deeply human. Commanders, pilots, and sailors reflected on the sheer audacity required. The strike exemplified how courage, preparation, and trust in both technology and comrades could converge in a fleeting moment to produce results beyond imagination. It was not brute force alone, nor luck, but the alignment of human skill, daring, and precise execution. In the broader context of the Pacific War, Mitchell's run reinforced a critical lesson. Warfare had evolved, and those willing to challenge convention, carefully, intelligently, and boldly, could achieve outcomes that reshaped battles, morale, and doctrine. The aftermath was thus not only the physical destruction of 8 ships, but a psychological and strategic shockwave, one whose effects would echo through both fleets, through surviving crews, and into the historical record. As the smoke over the Philippine Sea gradually dispersed, the echoes of explosions faded into memory, leaving behind sunlit waves, scattered debris, and a new understanding of what a single, determined pilot could accomplish. The moment of destruction was over, but its lessons and its human significance would endure. In the stillness that followed the storm of fire and steel, the Pacific returned to its indifferent calm. Waves lapped against scattered debris, the smoke from the destroyed ships curling into the sky like silent witnesses to human audacity. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's 50-foot run had ended, yet its significance extended far beyond the horizon. It was a moment where courage met precision, where a single man's skill could bend the course of history, if only briefly, over a stretch of ocean. The strike was not about heroics alone, it was a lesson in trust. Trust in training, in technology, in leadership, and in the human capacity to act decisively under impossible pressure. It showed that warfare was no longer merely a contest of numbers, but of ingenuity, preparation, and the ability to challenge convention with absolute discipline. One pilot, flying lower than any doctrine permitted, had rewritten the expectations of naval combat, proving that audacity, when executed with precision, could achieve results previously deemed impossible. Yet there was also cost. Men perished, ships sank, and lives were irrevocably altered. The human consequences of war, fear, loss, resilience, remained, reminding us that even the most brilliant strategies unfold within a landscape of suffering. Mitchell's strike was a marvel of execution, but it was also a stark testament to the lethal stakes of conflict and the fragile line between skill and catastrophe. History, in turn, remembered, The event became a case study in naval aviation, cited in manuals, lectures, and retrospectives as an example of calculated audacity. But more than doctrine, it endured as a human story, of focus under pressure, of courage tempered by discipline, of a moment when one man, an aircraft, and the vast Pacific collided to create an outcome both extraordinary and devastating. In the end, the 50-foot run reminds us that in war, as in life, the boundaries of possibility are often defined not by what is safe or conventional, but by what is dared, prepared for, and executed with unwavering precision. And as the waves calm and the sun dips on the horizon, we see that history is shaped as much by audacity as by strategy, and by the quiet courage of those willing to risk everything for the mission ahead.